Hello, welcome to Book World: The Great Escape. I'm author CJ Peterson. My co-host over here is author Michael Scott Clifton. Today we have special guest, author Whit McClendon. His genre is epic and urban fantasy. Before we get to him, Mike, how was your week?
It's been very interesting. Before we get started, I want to let our viewers know that I have not been in a car accident. This thing on my head, and Melanie did not get mad and hit me over the head, and I'm not some victim of a rare tropical disease. It's something the dermatologist and I came up with for. Unfortunately, my family, we get these skin cancers, and this is a proactive way of cutting it off at the pass. So it looks kind of ugly, but trust me, it's a lot better looking than it was several days ago. So anyway, this week we've had tons and tons and tons and tons of rain. I don't remember when we've had so much rain, and it's got to have been a long, long time ago. So we've received over 6 or 7 inches of rain in less than a week. And so I've got a small pond below my house. If I had thought ahead, I could build it up a little bit and stock it and probably sell fishing licenses for people. But
yeah, I don't know who's messing with the weather, but please stop.
I know. And I know last night CJ came out of Oklahoma, so I don't know how that affected y'all, but it headed straight down to Northeast Texas. I think finally we may have a few dry days ahead of us because, it's just been like living in the Everglades. It's just that wet. Do have two events coming up this Thursday. Melanie and I will be at the Longview Art Walk. Actually, they normally have it in July, and they've moved it to June to try to take advantage of some nicer weather, because July in Longview, Texas is pretty hot, pretty humid, pretty miserable, and there's a lot of outdoor vendors. And we, of course, are inside of the Vera Bank lobby, so we'll be there for the quarterly art walk in Longview. And then this will be my second time, Melanie and I's second time, to be at the Mississippi Comic Con, which is in Jackson, Mississippi. We went there last year for the first time, and it was fabulous. It was awesome. And we sold out brought extra books just to be on the safe side, still sold out. And so hopefully we'll bring a few more books this time, and wouldn't mind selling out again. And also really excited because I got a notification a week ago that I'm going to be that we've been accepted to be in the Bell County Comic Con, which is in Temple. And nice. That's one of the largest, I think Fan Con in Dallas may be the only one that's larger, at least around these parts. And so I didn't know if I could get in or not, but yeah, we're in. So we're really looking forward to that. And that's going to be in August. And so real excited about that. And so that's this week in review. So yeah.
Well, congratulations. Mombi Rella's watching. My co-hostess, one of my co-hostesses from Magic Making Mischief. Hey, Mombi. So for me, my next Comic-Con is going to be, as I said before, it's going to be Piney Woods Comic-Con. That's going to be August 17th and 18th in Lufkin, Texas. Cannot wait. Lots of fun things coming up regarding that. I know that one of the guests is going to be canceling. It's going to be Chuck Huber. That's because his lovely wife just had a beautiful little baby girl. Congratulations, Chuck. We're so excited for you. She's downright adorable. So, Mr. Whit McClendon, I'm so excited to have him on. I met him down at Brazoria Comic-Con, I believe last fall, was it?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I believe it was the first Brazoria County convention. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I've seen you at a couple of them, and I'm like, okay, I've got to have him on because his books are pretty cool.
Oh, you're very sweet.
So, for those who don't know about you, why don't you go ahead and explain a little bit about your books?
Okay. I write epic fantasy and also urban fantasy. So I always tell people at my booth, I said, okay, over here is the swords and sorcery section, kind of a Lord of the Rings style, classic Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of thing. because I grew up on those kinds of stories. But then on the other side, I have my urban fantasy stuff. These are stories that take place in the here and now. They're set in the west side of Houston, where I happen to live. And yet they also have strong elements of magic, monsters, fey creatures, and all that kind of thing. So that's my urban fantasy stuff.
Got it. But down in downtown Houston.
Yeah, there's a little bit that takes place downtown. Most of it's more out towards the west because that's the stuff I see all the time.
Got it. So where do you come up with your ideas?
I wish I knew because I'd go there more often. But yeah, a lot of times I will just see a scene in my head, and I mean, well, that's pretty much the only place that I would see it, isn't it? But I would end up.
Well, I mean, there's that fine line us authors kind of tote between crazy and reality.
Yeah. But yeah, a lot of times
for our crazy, I tell people all the time.
More on the crazy, goofy side for me, but yeah, I would end up seeing a scene, and I would be kind of intrigued by it because initially, if something pops up in my head, I wouldn't like, well, who are these people? What's going on? This looks really cool. Basically, it would be like seeing a teaser trailer for a movie that's out. And so then from there, I start thinking about, well, who could these people be? What's going on? What are the nature of these characters? And from there, usually that's where things start to come about.
Got it. So how long have you been writing? Or actually, let me phrase that. How long have you been published?
I published my first epic fantasy book, and that was Mage's Burden. I published that in 2014, and I actually started writing that one in 1993. It took a while for me to get that one all tied up. I was a very lazy author for a while. But once I finally got it started, then I had really good feedback, and I enjoyed the process, and now I knew how to publish. And so I just kind of kept going. And so my averages were roughly one a year since then.
That's cool.
Yep. So do you write standalone novels, Whit? Do you have series or a mixture of both?
It's very much a mixture of both. The first story that I wrote ended up being a trilogy, and that's kind of how I had envisioned it. That was that epic fantasy trilogy. And then the next story took place in that same fantasy universe, but 20 years later. So at that point, some of the characters were still around, except they were old like me, right? And so I wanted to explore this new story with those older characters. And then the urban fantasy, it's a series, but each book is a standalone. So you don't have to read book one in order to know what's going on in book two. But it's a little more fun, I think, if you read it that way. But somebody could step in at book 3 or 4 and still enjoy it, and then maybe want to go back and read the histories and see what happened.
Oh, that's kind of cool. So with your first series you're talking about, it's almost kind of like the characters kind of cross over into the other trilogy. Is that how I'm following?
In the epic fantasy world, I have the first trilogy that I wrote, and then I have a 2-book series, the duology, that story is the one that takes place 20 years later in the same world with some of the same characters. And so there is some, some of those folks you get to see again. In the urban fantasies, it follows these a small group of characters and their various adventures. So the books are kind of episodic, if you would, like a TV show.
Mombi said she likes the continuity of that.
Oh, cool. Hi, Mombi.
Yeah, that's kind of what I did with my first 13. It's like the characters kind of crossed over storyline. So I had like a trilogy, a set of 5, a standalone, and then I did a 20-year jump. And so you kind of got to hear like the end of some of the other stories. So it was kind of neat like that. But it sounds kind of like that's what you did with your one. Is it was like the trilogy of the one, then a 20-year jump. And that's kind of neat.
I'm at the moment I'm working on the next book in that urban fantasy series, but also a book that's in the same universe with some of the same characters, but has a different focus. So it's kind of a standalone on its own, but like for the Grim Fairy Chronicles, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm working on 5, but this other book is not in, it's not one of those. It's going to be out by itself. So there
Okay.
will be crossover between the characters, most certainly. But it's not, it didn't quite fit with the others.
Right.
So your epic is one world and your urban is another. So you kind of got them
Yes, that's correct.
separated but equal. So like your epic
Mhm.
is one world where the characters kind of tiptoe around each other, and then your
Mhm.
other one kind of tiptoe around each other in their world.
Right.
So you've
Yeah.
got almost
In
like
the
a
epic
dual
fantasies,
mindset going on.
Yep, it's a different mindset completely for both of them, because it's the urban fantasy, like it's present day right here in the Houston area where I live,
Right.
and
But their worlds collide every once in a while.
yeah, all the epic fantasy stuff, that's a whole other place.
Yeah.
It's like, you'll never see. Let me see. One of my characters' name is Gart. You'll never see Gart in the urban fantasy books,
Right,
because it's a whole other
their
world.
it's kind of like you've got your two different worlds, but their
Mhm.
worlds collide, and then
Oh,
in
yeah.
this world, their worlds collide.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay, I'm following
Yeah.
you. I got it now.
Mhm.
There's so many subgenres now of fantasy, and urban fantasy, paranormal fantasy. With urban fantasy, when I'm talking to, like, say at Comic Cons, to some potential, readers who may have not, or at an event like Longview, the Longview Art Walk, who may have never read fantasy before, or at least they don't think they have. And I explain it to them in the sense that it's really for understanding's sake, think of it as contemporary fantasy,
Mhm.
where you
Right.
have a contemporary setting with contemporary characters, but you have some sort of magical twist to it. Could be an object,
Right.
could be special powers or something that a person who lives in this world. You mentioned Jim Butcher. That series, perfect example of that. You have a wizard living
Exactly.
in Chicago who has wizardly powers, but in every other way, he's as ordinary as all his neighbors around him. And I think that sometimes, when people say, "Well, I don't read, that stuff's too fantastical," but if you can get them to just stop for a second and consider, well, if you read fiction is fantasy, whether it's historical, whether it's romance, et cetera, et cetera. Fiction is fiction. You're making things up. And anyway, so I try to urban fantasy and contemporary fantasy, to me, are two sides of the same coin, depending on who you're talking to at the time. And would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And yeah, it's like, sometimes people can get hung up on maybe not understanding the genre, the category, just because of the name. They're unfamiliar with it.
Yeah.
But then you say something like, well, Harry Potter, and they go, oh yeah, I love Harry Potter, but I don't want to read that urban fantasy stuff. And it's like, well, you actually are, because that's exactly what it is. It's magic that's in our world,
right?
But it is magic, so.
That's
Well,
right.
technically, I would put out that technically sci-fi was magic fantasy until you proved where it came from.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I agree.
Well, it's the I think there's a lot of readers that, as you have pointed out, they misconstrue fantasy with and think, well, this is something I'll never be interested in. Yet, do you read Harry Potter? Of course, I did. You read The Lightning Thief, Rick Warren. Well, yeah, well, all those are fantasy elements, but you read them. And like I said, I think that I've read most of the Dresden File books, and he really does a good job tying the a person with those wizardly elements that Dresden has, and wish I was good at that as he was.
I hear that. I think the thing that may escape some people is the idea that, oh, I don't want to read that fantasy stuff. Any story, regardless of genre, it's very much about the characters. You have to be able to connect with the characters, and whether they're similar to you or incredibly dissimilar to you, you still have to be able to connect with them and their motives and their challenges and what's going on with them, and allow yourself to be taken along for the ride.
Exactly.
The ride may very well be a very mundane one in terms of the things that they see and do in the course of the story, or they could be fantastical elements, if there's magic and monsters and whatever. But regardless of whether those elements are present, good writing is about the story, the journey that the characters take.
Exactly. So let me ask you this.
Mhm.
So with fantasy, world building is huge. I think we all can agree with that. Okay. So when does the world building end and the story begin? Because I've found that a lot of people, the world building takes so long that the characters aren't well defined, the story's not well defined, and they just don't shove it aside because they don't understand. I think that's maybe one reason why more people don't read fantasy. But so when does the world building end, and when does the story actually begin, in your opinion?
I kind of like to start a lot of my stories out with a bang, with some kind of action, and then sprinkle the writing about the environment. It must make sense. It has to make sense. But I think as authors, we also have to beware of the idea that we feel like we want to lay out all the rules and all the groundwork and all the stuff
all at once,
and then start the story. It's like, no, I don't really want to do that. It's like, I think my very first book, it starts off with a character running headlong through the jungle because he's being chased, and he knows what's going to happen if they catch him. Okay, most of us have an idea of running, scared, jungle. That's a start. But then you can sprinkle in all of the other stuff as you go. I mean, that's what it is to tell a story. And whether the stuff is fantastic or more familiar, that's just up to the author to try and convey the story in such a way that the reader's carried along with it, rather than feeling like they're being dictated to.
Exactly.
I totally agree with that. To me, the author needs to know more about the world than the reader does.
Mm-hmm.
I think the reader needs to discover the world slowly. Otherwise, it's going to be like opening your mouth and putting like a charged fire line in and opening it up. And it's going to be too much information for the reader to digest.
Exactly.
I think the reader needs to learn as it goes.
Mm-hmm. And there's an art to that. I mean, I consider myself still I'm very much a student. Every time I write, I feel like I improve and I make all new mistakes. And so I'm trying to get better at carrying the reader along, making them interested and helping them connect with my characters, whether somebody's got wings, somebody's got claws, somebody's throwing magic around, or somebody's just kicking somebody in the face, whatever. That's the job, is to try and make the story interesting and reveal the environment in such a way that the reader can say, like, all right, I get it. There's bushes made of fire, whatever. Okay, I can see that. I get it.
Well, that's a really good point about that you said with sometimes if you're a writer of fantasy and author, you feel like you have to have every aspect of the world building up and out front right from the jump. And I think that's a great point. And I think because I've seen it happen to me as a reader, when I'm reading other authors, and well, it's like, okay, I get it. When are you going to talk about this character? When are you going to actually explain what the point of the story is? And I do think that a lot of readers who would enjoy fantasy are scared off by the world building aspect of it because they see books, this thick.
That can be very intimidating.
Right.
Well, kind of think of it this way. Think of it like Alice in Wonderland. Was all of Alice in Wonderland all up front?
Oh no, you had
No.
no idea what was going on until it
As
was
she went down
presented.
the path, you learned
Hmm.
about Wonderland.
Yeah.
A lot of it you didn't even totally understand about the White Rabbit till about
Hmm.
halfway or three-quarters through,
Well,
you
that's
know?
that's the art of telling the story. It's like that's always what I try to do. It's like I don't always succeed, but I feel like I'm getting better at it. And
To me,
it's all about
yeah,
the reader.
to me, that's how you deliver a world. It's
Hmm.
following down the path.
Yep.
So, we have about 10 minutes left. So before we get too far
Cool.
out,
Okay.
I know we wanted to talk about like Comic Palooza and a lot about your Comic Cons. I know you
Hmm.
do a lot of Comic Cons, but I know specifically you had a story about Comic Palooza you wanted to share.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, one of my favorite authors. Well, first, a shout out to Dennis L. McKiernan, fantasy author, who's been a friend and mentor for many years. I found him in high school and fell in love with his books. He was not at this Comic Con, but I wanted to give him a shout out because he's awesome. But I was scheduled to be on a panel, my first one at Comic Palooza. I've done other panels, just a few, and you're kind of wondering, it's like, okay, well, I wonder what's going on here. I wonder when it is. And I was scrolling to see when my panel was going to be. And it's okay. I was there on Friday scrolling. It's on Saturday. It's at 4:30. Okay. And Jim Butcher's on my panel. Jim
You're like, is that
Butcher,
a
the author of the Dresden
typo?
Files and all of that stuff. Yeah. And, I had to scoop my jaw up off the floor. I idolized the guy. He's an amazing author. I've read all the Dresden Files books. I mean, dude got it going on. And so, and just the idea that I was going to sit on a panel next to this guy just blew my mind. And he turned out to be super sweet, very funny, very eloquent with his answers, and as expected, but just a super nice guy, and they stopped by my booth on Sunday just before everything shut down. And we got to talk about boxing, because he does boxing and everything. And he's a really great guy. Really enjoyed it.
Very cool. So what Comic Cons do you have coming up?
Let's see. I know I've got NerdCon coming up.
Okay.
I don't have the date in front of me, but I definitely I love that one. There was so much good energy at the first time that I went.
Love the
So
NerdCon
definitely,
guys. They're awesome.
yeah. So definitely wanted to do that one again. I know I've got Brazoria County Con. Whenever it comes up again, I'm there. I'm so ready to
Okay.
go there. And I know there's
I know
several.
the lady that runs the floor is really, really nice that does that. I don't
Mhm. Cool.
I've heard that.
There's several little events in the Houston area this summer, but I don't know that I'm really going to be able to take advantage of them this time. There are a lot of other projects in my day job. I run a martial arts school.
Oh, cool.
And so it's like I don't know how much I'm going to get out for the rest of the summer, but NerdCon for sure, Brazoria County Con for sure.
Okay, cool. So do you have I know your website is down below. Do you have them listed on there as to where you're gonna be?
Usually on social media, on my Facebook page, my Instagram, I'll keep those kind of things. I'll post those as we get closer.
Okay.
I do have a website, and okay, look, I'll be honest, I haven't updated it in a while, but I think it's a good looking website, even so, and I think that it does have a link to my social media there.
Okay. Mombi says that NerdCon is November 16th and she'll see you there.
Cool, awesome.
Awesome. Okay, so for those who are potentially interested in writing urban or epic fantasy, do you have any advice for them?
There's two bits of advice, and I think I can be quick with this. Stephen King said, if you want to be an author, you have to do two things: read a lot and write a lot. And he wasn't playing. It's not that you copy from the books that you read; it's that they form a background, an atmosphere in your mind that lets your ideas come out of it. And it's so reading a lot in your genre is really important. And then the other thing is just butt in seat. You've got to actually do the thing. Thinking about writing is awesome. Talking about writing is awesome, but you have to sit there and, do this bit, and then the words will come. The other advice that I could say was given to me by a dear friend 20 plus years ago, because I told him I was stuck on a piece, and he said, well, what you're doing is you are writing with one hand and erasing with the other. You need to just let your words flow and then go back and edit them later. You can't edit what's not there.
That's right.
So that rang a bell with me, and then everything started to really go, because once I understood it's okay if the first chapters I write feel like junk, because they're probably going to be junk. But you know what? You can do some really amazing things with junk and turn it into treasure. And so allow yourself to just get your story on the page, and then you can go back and tweak it, remove stuff, add stuff, really craft it into something worthwhile. So don't be afraid. Just write it.
Right.
Gotcha. I always tell people you got to get the sand in the box before you can make the castle.
Yes.
Well,
That.
you can't.
Exactly.
But practically every event I've been at, especially Comic Cons, there's always at least one and sometimes several that, aspiring writers will, what's your best advice to help? Which is pretty much what you said, Whit, and that is you can't fix what is not finished. And you need to finish what you start.
Mm-hmm.
You can go back and you could add or subtract from it. You could make editorial, corrections, whatever. But you can't do anything until you finish what you start.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the way you put that about writing with one hand, erasing with the other, because that's almost exactly the vibe I get from a lot of these potential writers, because they come to us. Well, then I go off and I do this, and then I thought, well, I don't want to do that. So you're like in stasis. You don't move forward. You don't move backwards. You're just in one spot.
Definitely. For those who want to learn more about Whit McClendon and his books, you can check out his website at www.jidaan.com. So make sure
you also can go to whitmcclendon.com. It'll take you to the same place. I was young and inexperienced when I created that website the first time.
But you can definitely find him. His books are very cool. Like I said, I found him at Missouri Comic Con. Check out his table if you see him at a Comic Con. Just make sure to stop by and say hi. He's a very personable young man, so you can make sure to say hi. Thank you for stopping by today, Whit. We appreciate your time. Next week,
my pleasure. Thank you.
Next week, we're going to have Phyllis Still, and she's going to be coming to talk about historical fiction. So make sure to not miss next week, same time, same place. Catch you guys next week. Bye.